There's no way to prove something's secure. You can only prove it's not secure by breaking in. So that led me on a 6-year journey of being a professional hacker for the CIA.
Facebook and WhatsApp had a massive breach where they lost 500 million users' information that was then sold on the dark web.
And nobody was managing, protecting, or securing the keys. So in every breach, even today, your data is encrypted, but it's not protected.
Eric Cole, what a pleasure. Dr. Eric Cole, great to have you on my podcast today. It's great to see you, my friend. How are you?
I am doing great. The pleasure is all mine. I always enjoy getting to chat with you, sitting down. This time it's over a podcast and not over some Wagyu steak, but we'll have to do that again soon too.
Yeah, totally right. Yeah, we've had a few nice dinners together, and I've always had a great time with you. But today we're going to talk about something really interesting that I think impacts everybody, and maybe not everybody knows that it impacts them. And that is about security and things like ransomware and what's been happening in this whole world of craziness where every week we see another major breach and loss of information, all while we keep hearing that our data is super valuable, and yet it's being taken from us without even knowing. I'm sure you probably saw that even Facebook and WhatsApp had a massive breach where they lost 500 million users' information that was then sold on the dark web and then an auction. And then secondly, now just this last week, I'm sure you saw the news on LastPass, which was supposed to be your last password. And then all of that, and it was huge backing from major VC funds, et cetera. And all of that was now lost as well. All of that data was put out on the internet. So it just seems like what we think is secure is just not secure. And I think it raises the specter on encryption. And the reason why I wanted to have you on my show is because you are probably the world's expert on ransomware. I know you have a New York Times best-selling book on ransomware on that particular topic. And this is such a pernicious issue that people just don't have a clue about. It's way beyond the Nigerian prince problem. So this is like something that every one of us is having to deal with now, even smaller companies, law firms, everybody. And I think eventually it's just going to continue to pervade into every corner and every crevice of society. So great to have you here. You've got this total expertise in the field of security, cryptography, and it's an honor to have you on my show.
I'm excited, and like I said, I get to talk about our favorite topics, crypto, ransomware, and maybe we'll throw a little math in there too. You never know.
A little math in there. That's right. Actually, let's start with that because we have a funny story as to how we ended up meeting, right? Which was quite funny because I think you were at Black Hat when I presented, but I don't think you were in my presentation, but you'd heard about it. And so, I gave this presentation in 2019 on prime factorization, and I was limited as to what I could say. I'm not at liberty to say why I was so limited, but I was definitely limited. And let's just say there were government agencies involved as to what I was allowed to say in that presentation. And so you had heard something about it. And then 2 years later or so, we ended up getting connected through my partner, Vic, I believe. And so you said, I'll look at this. I want to see what this is. And we spent about 2 hours on the phone going through it. And then you said, well, you call me back on Monday and I'll see if there's something that I think that there's a there. And then on the Monday, we had another call and you said, I was only going to spend a couple hours on this, researching this weekend. And you said how many hours did you say you spent on it over that weekend?
Pretty much the whole weekend. There was probably about, I blocked off 2 or 3 and I ended up canceling plans and spending probably about 20 hours just going through it because it's addictive. Once you get into it, you just keep pulled in deeper and deeper. And then you're like, wait, this can't actually work. And then you do a few more proofs and you're like, wow, this really is pretty magical.
Yeah. So then we had a call on the Monday. You're like, okay, I spent, like 17 hours or 20 hours, something like that on it this weekend. He goes, and I've come to the conclusion that I agree with your assessment. So it was pretty remarkable. And that was a great moment for me. And so we've been able to work together ever since, and we've become good friends in the process as well. And tell us a little bit about your background and why you chose security and how you landed to this point in your life where you become this expert in this very, very highly specialized field.
So back in the 80s, when I was finishing up high school, I always was interested in architecture, but everyone said, hey, things are moving towards computers. Why don't you major in this thing called computer science, and then you could do anything you want if you know how to program a computer. So I started majoring in computer science, and to be honest, it was more like an electrical engineering degree with some programming classes, and was a little boring. So I go down to the co-op office and say, hey, I'd like to do an intern in computer science. And they go, funny thing, you should come down today because tomorrow the CIA is recruiting on campus, and they come every 2 years and there's an open slot. Would you like it? So make a long story short, they fly me down to Washington, D.C., go through all the polys and background checks. They offer me a job, and they basically say you have 4 options. You can do networking, operating system, programming, or cybersecurity. And everyone I talked to, even my advisors at school, were like, oh, go networking, go operating system. Cybersecurity is a fad. It's not going to be a big area. It's not going to be a big market. But I'm like, no, that sounds pretty cool. So in the 90s, even before the World Wide Web and what we know today, I was doing cybersecurity. And then as the internet came out, we started asking, how do we know the internet's secure? How do we know the web's secure? How do we know this technology is secure? So I started researching it, and there's no way to prove something secure. You can only prove it's not secure by breaking in. So that led me on a 6-year journey of being a professional hacker for the CIA, basically hacking everything with a computer and a few things without computers, and just really understood and learned the offense really, really well, and became very good at pattern recognition, where you could look at a system very quickly and recognize the patterns, the vulnerabilities, and the ways to exploit them. And then after leaving the CIA, I determined 2 things. 1, offense is easy, so I want to move into defense. And 2, I don't like working for other people. So that's when I began my entrepreneur of building and selling companies in the cybersecurity space. But I've always been fascinated and interested with crypto, because even in the late 90s, early 2000, when these breaches were happening, the question I kept asking that nobody seemed to answer was, if the data is really encrypted, how can the attackers actually get it? Right? We hear all the time that your data's encrypted, your data's protected, your data's secure, encryption, encryption, encryption. But then we hear an attacker breaks in, takes the data, and has instant access to it. So I kept asking, are they lying that it's not really encrypted, or is it encrypted, but there's a bigger flaw that nobody wants to talk about? And that's when I realized the problem was not the encryption. The problem was key management, and nobody was managing, protecting, or securing the keys. So in every breach, even today, your data is encrypted, but it's not protected because the key is stored with the data. So once somebody gets your encrypted data, they get the key, they decrypt it, and it's pretty much game over.
So, and is that also because of something called a block cipher approach, where, you know, you've kind of got one key for everybody's data? Right. And that's kind of the problem. I mean, how, because otherwise, if everyone had individually encrypted with separate keys data, how would it be easy to get 500 million files, right? It would be very difficult. It couldn't do that. But because it's all under one lock and key, it's like one padlock for 500 million people. That's how you have these massive system-wide breaches, which seems ridiculously dumb. Like, why do we do it this way?
That's one of the things I always say in cybersecurity. Common sense is not always common practice. And the analogy I give, if you want to see how your data is protected today, imagine you went to a hotel and you lost your key. So you go up to the front desk and you say, hey, can I get a new key? And so they run it through the system and they hand you a new key, and you go, but you never asked for my room number. And they're like, oh, it's okay. The same key opens up all the doors in the hotel. And you'd be like, what? You'd be like,
What?
that doesn't make any logical sense. Yet that's exactly what companies are doing to protect your data. They're using
This
the
is like the
same
face
exact
slap
key.
emoji. It's like, what the heck? It seems like such a basic thing. I mean, why couldn't you have like a one-time use key for each room, just like we have in hotels?
Exactly. And that's where I think we have lots of overlaps with our passion, but one of our overlapping passions is the whole idea behind OTP, or one-time pads or one-time keys, where it's not hard to do. But the problem in cybersecurity is, because things have been done a certain way, everyone always continues to do them that way. And nobody ever steps back and says, is this really logical? Is this really secure? And that's one of my problems with cybersecurity with crypto. We believe crypto magically protects us, but we're ignoring the most fundamental part, which is key management.
Yeah. Wow. So how could you fix it?
The easiest way to fix it is two simple rules. Keys are never stored with your data. You always store your key on a separate server. And second, you use a different key for each record. So now, even if somebody broke in and got one key, they'd only be able to get one record, not 50 million or 100 million records. Like you said, we just saw a recent breach with 500 million records. The only possible way that could happen is if the key was easy and accessible, and it was the same key for all the records. So we separate the key from the data, step one, and we use a different key for each of the records, step two. And it's really that simple in practice, but because you have so much data that's protected using insufficient keys, nobody wants to address it and nobody wants to fix it.
Wow. Wow. I mean, what you just said sounds so basic and so obvious. And so you kind of just have to wonder, why isn't it that way everywhere? I mean, you would think that's the way hotels do it, right? I mean, you wouldn't leave all of the keys for everyone's hotel room in one small desk, and then actually one key would open every room also. You just would never do that. But somehow that is what's being done right now in corporate America, which is pretty shocking. And so, I mean, first of all, if the data is all encrypted and it's encrypted separately, the worst case you would have is that they would get through maybe a few files, but they'd have to come up with separate encryption keys, which would take a really, really, really long time to have any meaningful access to it. So it's just a simple thing to have them all have separate keys. That would be, one step, but then just not putting in the same place where all the rest of your stuff is stored is another simple solution. So how difficult is it for a company to actually implement something like that?
The problem up until recently in working with you is there wasn't a lot of good solutions out there, because nobody wanted to deal with this issue. It was sort of the best kept secret, is let's not say anything. And that's one of the reasons behind what I'm trying to do with my book, Cyber Crisis, and others, is raise awareness. We would never tolerate a hotel to have the same key for every room, because we're aware of general physical security. Nobody is aware of cyber. Nobody knows this is happening. If consumers knew this was occurring, there would be such an uprising that it would be fixed very, very quickly. So I'm doing it twofold. One, I'm working with organizations like Theon that are actually implementing solutions that work. So now when I go to my clients, I'm like, here's an actual solution. No more excuses. And then I'm going out there to consumers and raising awareness to the point where they will no longer tolerate their data being falsely protected or falsely encrypted.
Wow. Wow. And so how pervasive is this, problem of ransomware right now? Because obviously this is very, germane to this particular topic. Obviously, taking data, 500 million people's data is one thing, but also this ransomware thing, which for people that may not be aware of what ransomware is, maybe you could describe how ransomware works. For a company, it could be for a municipality, for a state government. All of these have been targeted pretty much. So maybe explain what ransomware is for people.
Sure. So a ransomware attack is where an adversary breaks into your computer systems and they take control of those systems so you no longer have access to them. And the easiest way for them to do that is they encrypt your data with their own key. So essentially, you're locked out of your own house, you're locked out of your own safe, and then they come back and say, unless you pay $100,000 or $1 million, you'll never get your data back. Now, the traditional way is if you have good backups and your data is properly protected, then the ransomware shouldn't happen. But what's happening today is because companies aren't backing up their data, and this sounds so bizarre, but with ransomware, we have the commercialization of cybercrime, that these are commercial companies that, believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying it, actually perform very reliable services. So it's actually, in most cases, if it's a reliable cyber criminal, it's actually cheaper, quicker, and faster for you to pay the ransom and get your data back than to try to recover it and get it back on your own. So it's really a situation where we have such poor security, and because the criminals have such good levels of service, it's actually a cost of doing business for a lot of companies.
So they just made it easy enough that it's just easier to pay. And so just to make sure I get this right. So let's say that you are going to threaten me with a ransomware attack. So you come into my computer, you access it somehow, some way, right? And what's the most common way they access it? Like through some sort of like phishing scam, or how do they do it? Keyword search or strokes on your keyboard, spiderware, what is it?
Usually phishing is the most common, where you'll get a legitimate looking email. Like the one that's very, very common is your recent FedEx package was unable to be delivered. To prevent it from being returned to the shipper, please click on this link to schedule delivery. Now, most people in the course of their life or business use FedEx. And you might go, but Eric, how did they know I did it today? Well, they sent that message out to 1 million people, knowing that 30,000 of them sent the FedEx package in the last 24 hours. So people go, Eric, I know normal phishing, you say if it looks unusual, if it looks strange, but this doesn't look unusual. It doesn't look strange. It comes from FedEx. It has their logo, right? So you think it's legit, you click on it, and game over. And just to be
by
clear,
clicking on it.
Yeah, because I use FedEx, just to be clear, this has nothing to do with FedEx, right?
Of course,
FedEx can have the best security.
So by you clicking
in the world.
on it, how do they get into your system just by you clicking on it?
So when you click on it, in a lot of cases, it's called a drive-by download redirect. So they actually will eventually take you to FedEx. So the real page comes up, so you actually think it's legit. The only issue is, on the way to FedEx, they stop at another website, drop malware on your computer, which we call a drive-by download, without you even knowing it, installs on your computer, takes it over, and then redirects to FedEx. And all of this happens in 2 to 3 seconds. So from a user standpoint, they don't think anything's wrong. They think it was all valid, and they go on their day, and now their computer is compromised with all of their data. So as soon as they connect back to the corporate infrastructure, it just spreads rapidly, goes after the data, and encrypts it.
So this is malware that automatically infiltrates your computer system, finds the data, right? Whatever you have, all your storage files and everything, and then it encrypts it with some sort of public key cryptography, I'm guessing, right? An AES. And then they somehow reach out to you. Is it like in an email? You get an email or a telephone call, and they say, we've got your data. and if you want to access back to it, because it's on your computer, so they never stole it, they never took it off your computer, right? It's just on your computer, and you can no longer access it because it's all encrypted. So then what's the most common way for them to reach out to the company and let them know they've done this?
Usually they'll email you, unless it's the email server that they're holding ransom, and then they'll usually text you. Or what some of them will do is actually change your website. So they put a message on your website saying this site is no longer is temporarily unavailable because it's been hit with ransomware. Please have a corporate representative contact us at this location. And then they'll usually communicate with them that way also.
So let's say you have a small business. you rely and depend on the survival of your business being tied directly to your ability to operate your website, for example. Because if people go there and they can't get into it, they may not be able to then buy any products from you. You'll have reputation risk and everything. So then you get a call from your customer saying, I just tried to go on your website and it said you guys have had a ransomware attack. So that might be a way an executive learns about their ransomware attack. Wow.
That's correct. And then these attackers, these cyber criminals, are smart enough. They know your business, so they know what your pain point is. So if it's a small company, they might only ask for $5,000 or $10,000 ransom because they know that you make $20,000 a day. So if you're down for a couple of days, it's cheaper to pay the ransom. And then the larger companies, they might raise it, but they're actually doing a ransom that we call a competitive payment, that it actually makes more sense for you to pay than to go without your data for multiple days.
But the problem is if you pay it, there's no assurance that you're not going to get hit by another ransomware.
I joke, it's like when you go to a website and you sign up, you get put on their mailing list, right? Because you are now a customer and they like you. Well, guess what? If you pay the ransom once, you are now on the frequent flyer or mailing list for that company, and they're going to keep trying to come after you over and over again. So our recommendation to companies is, of course, have good security, fix the vulnerabilities, protect your endpoints so you don't get hit with ransomware. But if you have to pay the ransom, it's a business decision. That's up to you. Pay it, but then make sure you fix the problem and redesign your network so it doesn't happen again. Because otherwise, we have clients of ours where if you look at their financial statements, they actually have $300K each year as part of their financial statements earmarked for ransom payments. And to them, it's a cost of doing business. They've just accepted the fact that they're going to have to pay the ransom instead of trying to fix or secure their data.
So, okay. So basically, you're saying that these ransomware are at the scale where they're willing to do all this effort because they've got scalability, right? They don't have to have people associated with this. It can be all automated for them. So they're willing to ransomware someone for only $5,000 or $10,000 in some cases.
Right. And it's even less than that. The big trend we're seeing now with ransomware is it's going personal. And what I mean by that is...
So on personal consumer level, like
Yes.
anyone can get ransomware now.
Right. So there's ransomware that targets individuals, and the ransom payment is $75. So let me ask you a question. If do you know friends or family members that have all their pictures of their kids, their grandkids, memories, their taxes and everything else, they get hit with ransomware? Is it worth $75 for them to get their data back?
Yeah, it's very much worth it to get it back, but it's not worth it to say, no, I'm going to fight you. What are you going to do? You're never going to be able to get at your data.
Right. So, and people go, but Eric, $75 seems so small. Yeah, but with the automation that you talked about, Robert, if I can do this for 3, 4, 5 million people, you're talking a couple $100 million in revenue with very high profit margins. So this is really big business where they're going after the individuals. And then the other interesting trend for business owners is ransomware is now switching to extortion. So instead of holding your data ransom, because so many companies are backing up their data now, so if they get hit with ransomware, they'll be like, we're not going to pay because we have a backup. But if they got your data to hold it ransom, that means they also got access to it. So now they come back and go, okay, Robert, I have all of your corporate records, all of your corporate data, all of your private information. Unless you pay me, I'm going to release it publicly. So now they're switching from a ransom to an extortion type style attack.
Wow. No, I know people that have been hit. I mean, even in my family members that have been hit, not necessarily as individuals as yet. They've been hit as, small business owners, but the payouts have still been on the low end, $4 million, on the high end these are small businesses, $10 million, $10 million, like crazy amounts of money, and it almost destroys the company. So, but they know it's just that threshold, right? That they can, it's sort of a pain tolerance threshold that they know is going to be ultimately painfully accepted. And so they've really honed their art. Where are these people located? I mean, do you guys have an idea where they're mainly coming from?
We do, and in a lot of cases, we know the company names, we know the owners, we know their business address, but the two problems is they're in countries in which the United States doesn't have extradition treaties, and they're not illegal to hack outside of the country. So we're seeing a lot of these attackers, Venezuela, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, China, because all these countries, if you're hacking outside of the country, it's not illegal, so there's no crime. And we know who they are. I mean, I joke sometimes when I travel over to Russia, some of these CEOs of these ransomware companies, because I know them, they know me, they're like, hey, can we take you out to dinner? And I'm like, that seems a little weird, right? So, but over there, they didn't commit any crimes. Mm-hmm. And they didn't do anything wrong according to local or laws in their specific country. So that's the big problem is we have all these individual laws per country, but nobody ever thought about the global internet, and we don't have any global laws, which puts us in a disadvantage and the attackers at a huge, huge advantage.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So are there ways that, I mean, as a practical consumer, other than just having everything backed up, is there a possible solution to this using blockchain?
Absolutely. So a couple factors. One is if consumers or individuals start storing or putting all their information in cloud-based servers, so now they don't have anything locally, and the cloud-based providers actually encrypt the data correctly using proper blockchain, OTP, and crypto keys, so we know that our keys are not stored with our data. We now have trusted cloud providers, and individuals put all their data there. And all of a sudden, we turn the tides on the attacker because I have nothing local, and my data is now in a secure, backed up location. And even if you get access to it, the keys are stored separately, and nobody can actually get to my data. So there are scalable solutions, but once again, we have to change people's mindsets that this is a problem because nobody thinks it is in order for people to start implementing and using it.
How much do you estimate the total theft, or, you know, this is a form of theft, but the total payments for ransomware have been over the last, year, for example?
So what's interesting is last year, the estimate, and these are usually conservative because a lot of companies don't report it.
Well, because it's technically it's illegal to pay it off because it's violation of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
Yeah. But actual reported last year was about $23 billion in 2022. But you want to get really scared? It is now February 2nd, and for this year, for 32 days or 33 days, it's already $4 billion. So if that trend's projected, it's going to be almost $60 billion this year to ransomware, more than tripled what it was last year.
Wow. Wow. This is just mind-boggling. So I'm thinking about this, though. I do think that there's probably a solution for blockchain storage that could either be cloud-based or otherwise, right? And then have the keys be distributed across the nodal network. So there's no one place for the keys. They're sharded or fragmented across the distributed nodal network. To me, that's very, very interesting. And I think that's a solution probably that's more easy to implement than a system-wide backup for everybody on everything. I think it would just be hard to implement something like that for individuals, if that's what we're talking about, where ransomware is going, right? So then basically what they're doing is they're doing an assessment on me and on you on how much you're worth and how much liquidity you have access to, and they're going to try to get the maximum amount they can by ransomwaring us. It's a new tax without a government.
Exactly. It's unfortunately really good businesses that are illegal and causing a lot of harm. But no, you're spot on. What I've always said is, if you're getting beat in a game, if you're getting your butt really, really kicked,
Get
why
better
don't
at
you
the
at least why don't you at least do what they're doing? I used to coach my kids' basketball team, and when they were losing a game, I'm like, let's at least do what the other side did, right? And at least score some points. And that's exactly the reason why we can't catch these adversaries, is because they're using blockchain to cover their tracks. So why don't we turn the tide and use blockchain to protect our data so they can't find it in the first place?
Now, how are they using blockchain to cover their tracks?
Because all ransom payments are done via cybercurrency, cryptocurrency, because it's untraceable and it can't be revoked back. If you did a ransom payment with credit card, I could
Yeah, you
trace
can
it
have it
back,
revoked back, right?
or you revoke it back, and then, like you said, that would be under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, by doing fraudulent transactions over international boundaries. But because there's no laws around cryptocurrency, and
Geez.
cryptocurrency is untraceable, technically, they're
It's
not
not.
violating any laws by taking ransom payments because of the means and methods that are being used.
This is kind of like, how they had to finally catch Al Capone, right? It wasn't on the umpteen murders and everything that he was definitely guilty of, at least either executing on himself or others under his, eye and sort of bossship, but rather they got him for like federal mail fraud type of
Yeah,
thing.
something silly, exactly.
Something silly like that.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of like the imp of the perverse of that in some way, because what they've figured out how to do is the slowness of our government to come up with new legislation has not included, these cryptocurrencies, even though we include Bitcoin and Ethereum as currencies in the definition formally, right, of what they are. That's fascinating. So they've
and
really
Robert,
found a brilliant loophole.
Yeah, and fun story with the Al Capone is, do you know which airport arrests more cyber criminals than any other airport in the United States?
Well, I'm guessing now Chicago or something. So O'Hare. But
Actually, it's a good guess, but it's not correct. And as soon as I say it, you'll wonder why. Is Las Vegas, because the way we lure a lot of these attackers is they love to gamble. So we scam them with messages from Caesars and the other hotels saying, hey, we hear you're a high roller. Why don't you come to Vegas? We get them to come to Vegas, and as soon as they get on the tarmac in U.S. soil, the FBI is there to arrest them. So we actually use similar tactics against them to lure them back into the country. So we can.
I'm sensing a theme. If you don't like the game you're playing because you keep losing, just get better at the game that they were playing.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. That is super fascinating.
Steal their playbook and use it.
Wow. So that might be a way then to utilize blockchain for individual consumers to safeguard themselves. And because that's the nice thing about blockchain as well, is you could have it all be tied to a cloud service or IPFS, and you could have it all be encrypted as well. That's a very, very fascinating concept and solution I had never thought of or contemplated before. And then you could easily have the keys in separate places. So it basically covers two problems. So we'll have to come back to that one in another discussion. So what do you think is going on, in the crypto industry right now? So as you kind of look at crypto and where it's gone after the whole Sam Bankman-Fried thing, and do you kind of see blockchain becoming a more pervasive aspect of large corporations as well?
Absolutely.
And how they operate their businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what's happening now is, I'll let you in a little bit of what's behind closed doors. Everybody admits it's broken. People don't like me because I'm one of the few people that's publicly going out and say it's broken. And nobody likes that because they're like, no, we don't want people to know it's broken until we have a solution. And I'm like, well, we have a solution. So now big corporations are figuring out, how do we take these systems and servers and data that's been encrypted for so long using substandard key management, and how do we migrate all these over to new systems, test them, verify, validate them? It is much, much harder than it sounds to do a full migration, to decrypt, to re-encrypt, to store that. So big corporations are now realizing they cannot ignore the problem any longer, and they're putting in solutions. The problem is anything of this mass takes another 2-3 years for it really to be rolled out and really to be done correctly. But the good news is there's finally solutions like Theon that companies recognize. So the good news is corporations are realizing this can't be ignored any longer. And there are solutions out there. Now we just have to work with these companies to show them that there's an easy implementation path to get it done, because you look at the years of data, 20, 30 years of data running on large amount of servers. So trying to migrate and change and switch how they do business, and the infrastructure isn't easy. But the good news, at least there is solutions and a path ahead to start fixing it.
Interesting. So, it's funny what you said about the security industry not wanting to necessarily agree with or hear what you're saying because it's kind of painful for them, right? To a certain extent. I know the feeling, I certainly got it when I started saying I thought that RSA was very vulnerable as an encryption approach because of prime factorization and, not only related to quantum computing, but also geometric attack vectors. And, now the whole world has sort of agreed with it, right? So it's only been a couple years later, and all of a sudden you've got the White House on Christmas Eve saying, oh, there was like an oh shit moment when they figured out that they could, quantum computers can be multi-threaded for more qubit power, right? So when they figured that out, they were like, oh no, we got to change all this like right away. So on Christmas Eve, we got this memo that came out of Washington and out of the White House. Have you seen that?
Yes.
And so I'm sure that's caused everyone in the industry probably to have an oh shit moment as well, because what it basically said is what they've often referred to as the day that prime factorization can be cracked is like a day zero, right? Or like it's like way worse than any Y2K scenario. So have people started to figure this risk out now? Have they really understood what's going on? That this is really kind of upon us now, much faster than what everybody thought, because they didn't think that there was a computer that was going to get to 2,000 qubits. IBM has announced their 1440, I think, coming out. But beyond that, if you can multi-thread qubits, then isn't that a super problematic attack vector?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. And it's one that people thought about for a while. But the issue always was the backbone connectivity was never fast enough to actually do that. But now, like you said, with some of the research that came out, they're looking at ways where you can create high-end backbones. So sort of think of like internet on steroids to interconnect. So there is enough bandwidth between the computers that you can start multitasking them. And now a lot of people are going, okay, what we thought was something we wouldn't have to deal with in this generation, we might have to address in 5, 6, 7 years or even sooner. So all of a sudden, that's starting to change a lot of things too, of, okay, do we need to rethink completely how we do crypto, how we protect data, and how we secure information? I mean, basically redefine what does privacy really mean in cyber.
Yeah. And I mean, how important a role do you think encryption plays in the go forward landscape of all this? Because I think a lot of people tend to think about, if I have a house and I have an impenetrable wall, then all the stuff I have in my house can be, safely stored. But actually, that may not be really true, because if you think you have an impenetrable wall, we now know that a piece of malware can come in and basically take all the stuff inside of your house and not allow you having access to it. But if all of it were separately encrypted, then you've dramatically mitigated your risk. So encryption then must play a gigantic role in value attribution to everything you own. It's not, if data is the world's most valuable asset now, then wouldn't encryption be the most important aspect to protect that data that's the world's most valuable asset?
Absolutely. And you just nailed it, because as we get more into cloud, distributed, and higher functionality systems, the perimeters disappear. So really, if you can access your data anywhere, any place, anytime, so can the attacker. So really, this concept of prevention and building brick walls and firewalls and moats really have disappeared and where things are heading. And it's all about your data, no matter where it is, needs to be protected, secured, encrypted. And like you said, the best way to do it is to take a play out of the attacker's playbook and use distributed methods. So your data not only doesn't exist in one spot, but even if you did get it in one spot, you get one piece, not millions upon millions of records.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's just, it seems like such an important thing. And, and then also, what about the whole NIST protocol on these different encryptions that they thought were going to be quantum resistant? There were 5 finalists and then 3 that were sort of the recommendations. And out of the 5 that were finalists, I think 3 already cracked, which is, I mean, in with standard computers in like, less than 2 days or 3 days. One of them was 53 hours. The other one was like 20 something hours. I don't remember exactly, but what do you think about this?
Yeah, that one was very, not only puzzling, but very, very concerning to me, because NIST, with their crypto bake-offs that they do and their challenges, usually get very high quality algorithms. So if you go back and look at some of the symmetric, asymmetric ones out there, all of the finalists were solid. I mean, they were all really good choices and they had to pick one, but ultimately any one of them were solid. Here, you have a situation where you're 5 finalists and 3 of them were broken with minimal effort. So it sort of makes you step back and scratch your head going, are the adversaries and counterattacks getting so good? Or are the people that's building the crypto no longer saying we want to play with NIST and doing it on their own and commercial and basically trying to take the government out of it? And knowing the researchers out there, I think it's more of the latter, where people are like, okay, we let the government try to do this for a while and look at the mess we're in. We're going to go and solve this on the commercial front. So I think less and less people want to play with NIST and just want to solve it independently.
Interesting. But, that's why we chose one-time pad as an approach, right, at Crown Sterling, because one-time pad encryption is not a mathematical equation. If it's really used one time, single use, then there's no way that you can, there's not an equation, a quadratic function or otherwise that you could utilize to be able to decipher it. And, that's the thing that's most appealing about this. It's not based on number theory, it's based on information theory. So is that why you're a fan of one-time pad as well?
Exactly, because like you said, multiple benefits. One is it's used to protect one record. So even if you get it, you get the one record, but the extra benefit from just single key encryption is the one-time pad aspect, which is, so you get my key, not only do you get one record, but when I re-encrypt it, you no longer get the record again. So you get the one record for one single instance. And now you look at it from an attacker standpoint of level and effort and energy for me to try to break in and steal data. And all of a sudden, it's no longer a viable option. The reason why ransomware and extortion are viable options is because they're easy. Once we make them harder, they will stop being viable options to the attacker.
Interesting. So if the company, what percentage of the ransomware cases were data at rest that were already encrypted? So before the ransomware got into it and then encrypted again, right? What percentage was already encrypted generally?
I would have to guess, but it would probably be, I would say, upper 90%, because almost all data that's out there is encrypted at some level. It's just not encrypted very, very well. Now, you could argue that if it was encrypted really well, they could still go in and do ransomware, but they wouldn't be able to do extortion because they could just re-encrypt it but never get access to it. But the fact that they're switching from ransom to extortion, which requires decryption, shows you not only that it's encrypted, but how bad and how poor the key management is, that they're able to get access to the data and switch it from a ransom to an extortion attack almost instantaneously.
So it's almost like a company nowadays, and individuals too, need to have a backup storage of, and it could be on a cloud or something or otherwise, so that any of their local data that's stored on clouds or in blockchains or whatever would be enough that if they got ransomware, they could access it and be able to use it to operate their businesses and their
Bingo.
day-to-day lives. So everyone needs a backup that's also encrypted, and then not let anyone know where that backup is.
Right. And encrypted with some form of multi-key or one-time pad encryption.
Yeah. That seems like the solution. How expensive is it for people to do that? Let's say that I needed to set up on a cloud, something like 10 terabytes of data just to make sure I got all my family's data. I just had this big problem on Apple where I passed my 2 terabyte limit on Apple. Oh my gosh, what a nightmare this has been. I cannot believe how difficult it was, because then I went to go to get a new phone and I couldn't even image the new phone, right? Because I was at my limit. So then I had to buy an external hard drive, and it takes forever to transfer all these files over. It's been a 2-week process and I'm still not finished with it. But how expensive is it for people to do that? Or is it just a very tedious process?
So the real question is not how expensive is it to do it? How expensive is it not to do it? Because
okay, fair enough.
What are you going to pay with ransom? And in our estimate with most companies and individuals, it's about to back up your data and protect it correctly is usually about a tenth of what you would pay for a ransom payment. So if a company is going to pay a $3 million ransom, usually it would have cost them around $300 to $400K to fix or address the problem in the first place. So it's really showing, and we do the math for companies, is proactive is going to be a lot cheaper than reactive.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Okay. Well, what do you think is likely to happen in the security industry then with all this change that's happening with quantum computing and otherwise, and this higher risk associated with multi-threading? Do you think pretty much is everything under review now in how you do security? Because I think there's got to be a very high degree of distrust amongst consumers as well as at the corporate level, because I'm sure CEOs are like, wait a minute, I'm tired of hearing about all this stuff that we think is totally secure, but there's like obvious back doors on everything.
Yeah. We're basically looking at rethinking and redesigning everything, because if you look at most of the security and most of the developments over the last 10 years, we're all on prevention and detection of attacks and nothing to do with our data. Like all this stuff on behavioral analytics and AI and cross-correlation, and we can detect new attacks and we can detect advanced phishing. All of that is great at some level, but the fundamental, as you said, is the data is the new digital economy, and we have ignored data security. We have done cybersecurity, we've done endpoint security, we've done network security, but data security has been this ignored area for too long. And now companies are realizing with the internet, the cloud, the tablets, and everything out there, the only thing that is going to matter in the future is data security. So now everyone's scrambling of saying, okay, how do we actually properly protect, secure our data? Because we've done everything but protect the core information over the last 15, 20 years.
Wow. So what are you thinking about as far as, let's shift gears for a moment towards personal data sovereignty, and how all these platforms today, you look at a platform like WhatsApp that's supposed to be an end-to-end encrypted app. But actually there are, there's no fee on use of WhatsApp. There's no subscription and there's no advertising. How do they get $10 billion a year in sales, which is what their reported sales number on WhatsApp? Are they selling data?
So I mean, it's one of those where it's like if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, right? So they've never come out and said that. But yeah, I have the same question when you look at that and Facebook and all these others, where you're like, they're not selling service, it's free service, no average. And you go back and say the only possible way they could be making money on this stuff is just by correlating the data, analytics, and information. Now, they all claim that they are scrubbing and modifying, so they're not giving away any personal information. But here's the question. If you go in and they don't take any of my personal medical information, but they know that I or somebody else has a medical condition, and they go over to Pfizer or J&J or somebody else and say, hey, you might want to talk to this person, it's a gray area. They haven't really violated any privacy laws by doing that. They haven't given away your personal data. They didn't say anything to the pharma companies about you or anything else. They just said, you might want to talk to him. Right. And that's what's happening nowadays. How they're getting around all these privacy laws is they're getting paid a lot of money to make connections of parties that might be interested. And they're doing it in such a way that the current laws basically aren't being violated.
Wow. This is just fascinating stuff. So it seems to me like, and we've done a lot of research on this, we know that companies like Facebook are basically selling scraped data, right, off of your usage on Instagram, your usage on Facebook. They know what you're going to do before you even do it. They have multiple places they can read you. And if you notice, when you're on WhatsApp now, it'll even have your geolocation bar will show up as well. So they're selling your geolocation, which is fascinating. What people don't know is that companies like Pfizer and Abbott, that do these large clinical trials, AbbVie now as it's named, they'll pay up to $27,000 a year just for things like geolocation data for type 2 diabetes patients. So our data is way more valuable than any service value we're getting because the product might be quote unquote free. Yep. When your social media is free or your messaging app is free, then you are the product.
Yes.
And what people don't know is the value of their data is the very best opportunity, I believe, for a sustainable, universal passive income for people. And I fundamentally believe this. And right now we're being pilfered of all of this value, and we don't even know it. That's why I just wrote this book called Neuromind with, and I know you wrote part of one of the reviews of it.
Yeah, it's a great
in
book.
The inside cover. And do you like how it was written with all these kind of stories? It's kind of interesting, right? And they really freak you out. The stories are like, wait a minute, one of the stories, I don't want to take the book's thunder, but one of the stories is you're driving a car and it's supposed to be an auto car that drives itself, right? It's supposed to be a self-driving car. And the policeman stops you and says, what are you doing driving? You're not allowed to be driving, right? This is a self-driving car. And then getting in a discussion with the cop because you wanted to drive. And now that's no longer allowable, right? Which is like kind of mind-boggling. Or if you're in trouble with the law, all of a sudden that car could lock its doors and take you straight to the police station. Yeah. Right. It's like, wow, there's just some really dystopian things that are definitely cooking right now in society. And so I think data is only going to become way, way, way more valuable. And the need for us to protect that data is going to increase exponentially, because the only thing that we have above all else is our own individuality. But even that now is being threatened with deep fakes, right? Have you seen the deep fakes right now? It's like now all of a sudden the next Indiana Jones movie is going to have Indiana Jones come back as a young man because they deep faked Harrison Ford as a young man.
But you know the craziest part with that when you get into the legality? If I go in and create a deep fake of you, because I created it, I essentially own the copyright to it. So now I could go in and start doing deep fakes that simulate phrases or things that you say or you do a lot. And I basically can now copyright. So now when you speak, you're violating. Like you start looking at these and it's like, it's just crazy where things are going. And like you said, we have to stop giving away our data for free. We love these free apps. They become drugs, but it's not worth the price of admission for what they're doing to our data just to get a free app.
No, it's insane. It's like the drug guy who shows up and basically says, oh yeah, your first cocaine or your first heroin is free, right? Get you hooked. And then you'll come back and they'll keep raising the price on you when it's time to basically, when they've got to get their fix. It's amazing. And that's what's happening. So they found the best way to make drug dealing legal. They literally made it legal because the drugs they're using for us is dopamine that we produce ourselves. So they don't even have to have a crop or a field to manage that crop. They don't have to do anything. They just have to basically tell you all the things that you want to hear, because that gives you dopamine. Every time everyone else agrees with you and says, oh, yes, I agree with your point, then you think everyone agrees with me until it's election day. And then you find out, how could anyone not agree with me?
Yeah, how could this have happened?
Right? It's like this, you go home at Thanksgiving, you have a conversation, politics comes up, and all of a sudden everyone's leaving before the football game, right? Because they're like, they can't be there. It's like they've lost the ability to even communicate with their families. This is what's happened with free apps.
Yep.
This is exactly, and I think Elon Musk is right on this one. I think he's bang on right, where he was trying to say, look, Twitter needs to have a price, because he also probably doesn't want to even admit that one of the key aspects of their business model for Twitter has not only been advertising, but it's also been, the notion of scraping data, just like all the other platforms have done. And that data is becoming more valuable every year. I sat next to an executive from Amazon recently, and I asked him what their most valuable product was across all of Amazon. Do you know what he said it was?
No, but I'm interested.
It was not a product that's in the store. No, it was the list of everyone who had recently changed their address to a new location.
Wow.
And you know why? Because that is the list that is the primo of all lists. Because you move into a new house, you need new stuff.
You need Amazon.
You need Amazon. You need new stuff. You need all these different, possible vendors who are going to basically come and give you a new, carpet, or come and give you a new furniture, or give you a new refrigerator, or give you a new whatever, a TV. Doesn't matter. That's when you spend a lot of money. So that's their most valuable product at Amazon. I was blown away by that.
I would have
But it makes total sense.
Yeah, I would have never thought.
Because the first thing we do is, when you move to a new address, like, oh, I got to put my new address in with Amazon. Okay, so they sell that list. Now, some of those things, maybe it's going to be tough to avoid, right? Because you need to have it delivered. It is what it is. But what we need to do is get really savvy. It's like, if you keep losing the game, get better at the game they're playing.
Yeah.
We need to level the playing field. And I think that blockchain, I think that encryption, I think compression technology, all of these things will come together to help consumers to level the playing field. And I think also it'll give access to consumers to be able to use the same type of encryptions to protect themselves and their own individuality that are used on nuclear codes and on all the state secrets. I think that's the thing that probably people don't like to hear the most. All the encryption we've had for many years now has always been crackable to the state actors. It's always been crackable. It's been based on brute force. If you have enough computational power, you can crack anything. It's just a matter of time and energy and how much money you can spend behind it. So that's been sort of the convenient, truth and reality behind the situation, but has never been given to the public straight.
Yep.
And that's what I'm telling you now. That is absolutely the truth. So we are in an age, I think, where data is going to only become more and more valuable, and it's going to literally come down to the control. You know what I found? One of my friends, he ran for Congress, and I asked him, what kind of apps do you use? What's the new technology for this? And he said, oh, I have this app that tells me every person in the United States that's voting age. And you can look yourself up on it. So I looked myself up, and I was shocked to find 56 pages of information on me.
Wow.
56 pages. Now, and I'm not talking about just basic stuff. I mean, of course, it had my home address, had all kinds of information in it. It said that my kids went to private school. Therefore, even though I'm not considered religious, I will act religiously because I will safeguard their ability to go to school. That's based on their algorithms, et cetera.
Interesting.
And that I was against abortion. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not against abortion. I'm for a woman's right to choose. But then I looked at the asterisk next to it, which was against abortion only in late stage pregnancy, like, 6, 7, 8 months into the pregnancy. And I'm like, well, that's true. They're like, well, that means you're against abortion. I was like, what?
Whoa.
That level of nuance, they had it all. They knew that before the COVID lockdowns were finished, I asked all my employees to come back to the office. That level of detail. So they called me a COVID hawk. They also said I was a hawk on China, that I had a distrust for China as a nation, that they, maybe had nefarious intention. This is the degree of information they had specifically on me. And I can't say any of it was incorrect. All of it was somehow, some way correct. So that is like mind-boggling and scary. And where did all that data come from? WhatsApp.
Google.
It all came
Amazon.
from Amazon. It all came from these companies that capture all my data and sell it. You could make an argument when someone is like getting, when companies are getting paid $27,000 a year for type 2 diabetes geolocation information for clinical studies and trials, how valuable is your data really? Is it even quantifiable? And that's the scary part. And yet we hear day after day, another 500 million here, another 400 million there, another billion person here. It's insane. And something has got to definitely flip. And I think the way for human beings to take back their own sovereignty is going to be in large part related to how they treat and act about their data. What do we do with our data? We are our data. Data is an extension of who we are today.
We have
It's
to stop
undeniable.
giving it away.
You got to stop giving it away. Yeah, maybe it's better to pay the $2 or $3 or $5 or whatever for an app that allows you to do the same things than it is to be losing, $2,000, $400, $500, right, every year because you're doing these free apps that aren't really free.
Now, that's my rule. I only do paid apps. If there's not a paid option, I won't use it.
Yeah, it has to be this way. It absolutely has to be this way. So how do you think government is going to change in this regard? And obviously government has to really think about how to stay ahead of things, right? I mean, like we've got all these problems today we didn't have before. I don't remember as a child hearing about voter fraud. I don't remember as a child hearing about, breaches and risks on systems, et cetera. But now people talk about it pretty regularly. I didn't hear about propaganda so much in the United States. But now you have someone like Elon Musk who outs the propaganda that came. Maybe there wasn't election fraud, but maybe there was selective exposure. And selective exposure is what's been happening on social media. I posted this morning on this Pfizer thing, right, in my LinkedIn. And I copied the CEO of Pfizer on it. And I said, I'm so shocked that you still haven't had a response or given a response to this whole Project Veritas exposure that came up with this executive who was purported to be a Pfizer executive that basically, was caught bragging to some guy that he thought he was on a date with, telling him about things like, oh, well, we don't call it gain of function, but maybe it's, what we're calling directed evolution of the virus so that we could make a solution for it. And it's a very kind of disturbing video if you haven't seen it. But immediately what happened to it? Project Veritas has been challenged many, many times. They've won every time in court on the veracity of what they've done. And yesterday, YouTube pulled it off. So the video on Project Veritas, you can't find on YouTube now. You can find commentaries about it, like Megyn Kelly did a commentary and others have done commentaries, but all of a sudden it's gone. So I posted it to, to my LinkedIn following. And I just said, Pfizer, why have you not responded? Is this guy indeed an executive with Pfizer? Is this truthful or not? Just tell us. And of course, I'm getting all kinds of responses on there. So it's funny. I also had this post that was hilarious. I saw this meme that was a picture of an apple. And at the top of it, it said, "This is a watermelon" in bold print. Right on top of the apple, it said, "This is a watermelon. But if you see it as an apple, then you're a right-wing conspiracy theorist."
That's awesome.
Right? So you talked about patterns at the beginning of our call, and being able to see patterns, there's a point where you want to give the benefit of the doubt, but you also don't want to be totally naive that you're completely on some other planet.
Right.
And I think that's what's happening in the world right now. And I can only imagine that, governments have to start really waking up to this too. Or maybe the role of government's going to change. Maybe the way we do voting registration is going to change. There needs to be some method to secure people's identity. I see this as the biggest problem coming. I have 8 fakes right now on Telegram. 8 people that fake me. I go on Telegram, I make a post, and 2 fake Robert Grants will comment within a minute saying, come to my private chat, right, where I'll talk about an opportunity for investment or whatever. And people get scammed.
Yep.
And the reason is because Telegram allows them to have the same nickname as me, the same photograph as me, and the same, URL, but with a tiny, tiny difference.
Yep.
Right, on the URL. But because the nickname's the only thing that shows up and they can have the same one as me, people think it's me. This is what's happening. Imagine metaverses now. There's going to be another Eric Cole, right? He may not be as cool as you or as buff as you or whatever, right? You're always ripped and working out and stuff, but there's going to be another Eric Cole.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of them, yeah.
And someone else might own that.
Yeah. Who really owns who you are nowadays?
Yeah, and governments are there to protect the rights of the individual.
Yeah.
Not the collective. That's what people don't understand. From the Declaration of Independence, governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed. And the whole purpose of it is to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. That to ensure these rights, we derive governments. We appoint governments. We basically put them in place as a republic. I think the whole process of everything that's happening in the world right now is coming under a new review. The pace of change is so fast. How do you think the government is going to deal with all of this change? How did the government deal with ransomware when it hit so quickly?
I mean, the problem is that they switched gears, but originally their approach was, which I was strongly against, is make ransom payments illegal. So if you make a ransom payment, the executives could go to jail. And I'm like, that doesn't solve anything, right? What the government should have been doing is, why don't they have minimal standards on cybersecurity? The way these attackers are breaking in are not hard. They're outdated operating systems. There's simple things that companies are not doing because they're not held accountable. So the government needs to start putting the regulation in place to protect the individual. But what we've seen Congress do over the last couple of years, which is really concerning to me, is they've actually protected big tech to hurt the individual. So we have to get out of this case where whenever there's issues, why do they have the CEO of Facebook, Twitter, and all those testifying in front of Congress? They need to have independent security people. They need to have citizens. They need to have the people impacted testifying, because they're being sold a bunch of you-know-what by these techs, and they're believing it. So my big concern is the government, instead of protecting individuals, is all about protecting big tech, as long as big tech filters and pushes the message. So essentially, we have a situation where big tech has been politicized, which is really scary at a lot of levels.
That is super scary. That is super scary. I can't even imagine. Look, we saw this. We thought, all of us probably hoped and maybe dreamt a little bit that maybe Zuckerberg, or, when he was at the Senate subcommittee hearings, congressional hearings, et cetera, that there would be something to kind of reduce the monopolistic power of these large tech companies, or maybe you could argue oligopolistic power of these large companies. But the truth is, the election cycle came through, and none of the congressional leaders on either side of the aisle fought against it, because we've got all this, political action committee money that comes in from these big tech companies. Nobody wants to fight against it. You're not going to win your reelection. So this seems to be like a system that is, at its root, problematic. And I don't know how it changes. I just don't know how it changes. It needs a system revision, it feels like. It's like we're on an old operating system, yep, and we need an entirely new platform. We can't just keep building on the old platform. That's the problem it feels like right now. Yep. It's like LAX, the worst airport in the world. It's been under construction for 20 years. Yep. Right? They should have just scraped the whole thing and started over the new airport. Yep. And that's kind of where it feels like we're sort of bumping up against that boundary of total obsolescence of our systems. And I don't just mean computer systems. I mean like systems in general. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, with the social media and the data privacy issue, like you said, it's one of those where the solution is pretty straightforward. Implementing it is hard. Is no more free services. All data belongs to the individual, and you can charge people for a service, but you cannot use or sell their data. And you basically say that we'll do a 2-year sunset. So the current models for Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all those, you have 2 years to switch completely over to a paid model. And there's a new law that's being passed in 2025 that all data belongs to citizens and you can no longer sell or use the data anymore. And I mean, there are ways to fix it. But once again, because like you said, it's all political now and everything else, they don't want to do that because it's not in the best interest of themselves. And they lost sight of doing what's in the best interest of individuals. And that's the problem today in our country and many other countries. If everyone stepped back and that was running the country said, what's the best for our citizens, this becomes easy. But as soon as they lose sight of that, it becomes hard.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Eric. It's been great to have you here with me today. It's always a pleasure to see you. I love how your mind thinks, and I love how you explain things so simply. You know, your solution to things sounded so simple, and yet why do we keep facing this? It's like over and over and over again, and it's really frustrating. But to know that the solution is actually very, very simplistic, in a way, is comforting too, because it means we can do something about it. All of these things we can do something about. And, you know, the Washington part, I think, is going to be harder. But I do think that there's probably solutions there, too, as long as the intention comes back to serving the individual in society. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure. Look forward to catching up with you the next time I'm on the West Coast.
Absolutely. See you soon, my friend.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.